The email arrived late in the afternoon, just as Elliot Hayes was wrapping up his final meeting of the day. His assistant, Naomi Carter, knocked on his office door, tablet in hand, her expression unreadable. "You're going to want to see this," she said, sliding the device across his polished walnut desk. Elliot adjusted his glasses and glanced at the screen. The sender was from The Morning Perspective, one of the highest-rated morning talk shows in the country. The subject line was direct, exclusive interview invitation. Elliot Hayes, CEO of Nextech Solutions. He exhaled slowly. He'd seen this play before. Naomi folded her arms. "They want you on a segment about the rise of Black entrepreneurs in tech." Elliot's jaw tightened. That phrase always came with an asterisk. Whenever a Black business leader gained national recognition, the mainstream media suddenly remembered their existence, rolling them out for an applause-worthy success story, before moving on to the next viral topic. But this time was different. Nextech Solutions wasn't some scrappy startup. They had just secured a $250 million defense contract, outbidding some of the most powerful names in the industry. That wasn't luck. That was 2 decades of relentless work, brutal setbacks, and undeniable innovation. And now, after years of being overlooked, they suddenly wanted him on TV? "Feels like a setup," Naomi muttered. "They love a rags to riches story, but they love tearing one down even more." Elliot leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. He wasn't naive. The timing was too convenient. Still, national exposure was national exposure. And if this was a trap, they were playing chess with the wrong man. "I'll handle it," he said, his voice measured. Naomi sighed, shaking her head. "Just don't let them bait you." Elliot smirked. "They can try." The morning of the interview, Elliot Hayes stepped out of the sleek black SUV and into the crisp air of Manhattan. The towering glass facade of KXNR Studios gleamed under the morning sun, reflecting a city that never paused long enough to blink. He adjusted the cuffs of his tailored navy blue suit, exhaling slowly. Showtime. As he walked through the front doors, the familiar sterility of corporate media enveloped him. Bright overhead lights, the faint hum of cameras and production chatter. Employees in headsets moving briskly, their expressions locked in controlled urgency. A young producer, couldn't be older than 25, rushed up, barely glancing up from her clipboard. "Mr. Hayes, thanks for being here," she said, her voice clipped, efficient. "We'll mic you up in 5. No small talk, no warm welcome. Just business." She gestured toward a side hallway, leading him to the green room, a windowless space painted in muted blues, filled with a couple of worn leather chairs and a mounted screen broadcasting the live show. Elliot took a seat while a makeup assistant dusted his face with powder, her movements impersonal, routine. The monitor flickered, revealing the ongoing segment, a celebrity scandal, a cooking demo, then a sharp transition card. "Coming up next, the rise of Black entrepreneurs. Is it talent or special treatment?" Elliot's jaw tightened. So that's the angle. He had expected something like this, but seeing it in bold, polished font on national television sent a slow, simmering heat up his spine. He wasn't here to talk about innovation, strategy, or how Nextech's groundbreaking cybersecurity systems had outperformed the competition. No, they wanted to frame his success as an anomaly, something that needed to be explained, dissected, justified. A beat later, Naomi's voice cut through his thoughts, her number flashing across his phone screen. "You seeing this?" she asked the moment he picked up. "Yeah," he said, keeping his voice calm. "They're setting you up." Elliot glanced at the monitor again, watching as the show's host, Catherine Monroe, prepared for the next segment. Poised, polished, and notorious for her ability to corner guests with questions that felt like quicksand. "They think they've got me figured out," he said, adjusting his tie. Naomi exhaled sharply. "Don't let them frame you. You control the narrative." Elliot smiled slightly. That's exactly what he planned to do. A moment later, the door swung open. The young producer returned, this time glancing up from her clipboard. "Mr. Hayes, we're ready for you." Elliot stood, rolling his shoulders back. Whatever they had planned, they weren't ready for him. The set of The Morning Perspective was designed to feel inviting, soft blues and golds. A sleek glass coffee table between the host and her guest, warm studio lights casting an artificial glow over everything. But to Elliot Hayes, It felt more like a stage for an ambush. Cameras hovered like silent predators, capturing every movement, every flicker of expression. The studio audience hands selected for their enthusiastic nods, and polite applause sat in neatly arranged rows, waiting for the show to begin. And across from him, in her signature crisp ivory blazer and camera-ready smile, sat Catherine Monroe, a seasoned journalist, sharp, calculated, a master at asking questions that felt like harmless curiosity, while slowly tightening the noose. She crossed her legs, her manicured fingers resting lightly on her cue cards. "Showtime. Elliot Hayes," she began, her voice smooth as polished glass. "CEO of Nextech Solutions. A true American success story." Elliot offered a polite nod. "Appreciate you having me." She smiled, flipping through her notes as if she hadn't already memorized every line. "Let's get right into it." She leaned forward slightly. "Your company recently secured a $250 million government contract, outbidding some of the most well-established tech giants in the country." A brief pause, the smallest of smirks. "That's impressive." Elliot knew this game. Build him up first. Make it seem like they respected his achievements. Then, when the moment was right, undercut everything. He kept his response measured. "It was a long process, but yes. We developed a cybersecurity encryption system that outperformed the competition. Simple as that." Catherine nodded, as if considering his words carefully. "Some have even called your work groundbreaking." Another pause. A shift in her posture. "Here it comes. But," she continued, tilting her head ever so slightly, "others have raised questions." Elliot didn't flinch. "Questions?" She picked up one of her cue cards, reading aloud. "Some industry experts have suggested that Nextech may have benefited from federal diversity incentives, that agencies are increasingly looking to diversify their vendor base. That perhaps, this wasn't just about being the best, but about meeting a quota." There it was. The real reason he was here. Elliot let a beat pass before responding, his expression unreadable. Then he let out a small, knowing chuckle. "I've heard that argument before," he said. "It's funny, though. When a black entrepreneur wins, it's special treatment. But when a legacy firm run by the same families for generations wins those same contracts, nobody questions it." The air in the studio shifted. The producers behind the cameras exchanged subtle glances. Catherine held her ground. "So, you're saying race played no role in your success?" Elliot's lips twitched in a half-smile. "Let me ask you this: when SpaceX won its NASA contracts, was it because Elon Musk met a diversity quota? When Jeff Bezos landed government deals for Blue Origin, was it because of his background?" A slight flicker in her expression. But she didn't falter. "Or," Elliot continued, his voice calm but firm, "do we only ask that question when the CEO looks like me?" Silence. A brief, almost imperceptible tension rippled through the room. And for the first time in the interview, Catherine Monroe had nothing to say. Catherine Monroe was good polished, practiced, unshaken, but Elliot Hayes had spent his entire career navigating conversations like this. She wasn't here to celebrate his success. She was here to explain it away. Catherine shifted slightly in her chair, crossing one leg over the other, her pen tapping softly against her cue cards. A calculated move. The kind of shift that signaled a new approach, a different tactic. "Well, Elliot," she said, her tone light but laced with something sharper, "let's talk about that playing field you mentioned." He nodded, waiting. She glanced at her notes, then back at him, her expression unreadable. "You grew up in Atlanta, raised by a single mother, went to public school. No Ivy League background. No deep family connections." She gave a small, practiced smile. "That's inspiring." Elliot knew exactly where this was going. Catherine continued, voice smooth. "But here's what some people might wonder. How does someone with no industry pedigree, no generational wealth, go from a struggling neighborhood to landing government contracts that billion-dollar corporations fail to secure?" She let the question hang in the air. The implication was clear. Who helped you? Who pulled the strings? Was it really just hard work? Elliot tilted his head slightly, as if considering his words carefully. But his response was ready long before she even finished asking. "It's called work, Catherine," he said simply. "Some of us don't have country club memberships or family legacies to fall back on. So, we build from the ground up." Catherine gave a small nod. like she was listening. But she wasn't. But surely, she pressed, you had some help along the way. Her smile was steady. Maybe a mentor? A program? Something that gave you an extra push? Elliot exhaled quietly, shaking his head. Help? He let out a dry chuckle. Sure, help came in the form of working 3 jobs while getting my engineering degree. Help came in the form of sleeping in my office while I built my first software prototype, because I couldn't afford rent. Her lips pressed together for a fraction of a second. The briefest crack in the polished facade. Behind the cameras, the producers were watching closely now, sensing that this interview was no longer following the scripted path. Catherine shuffled her cue cards again, recovering quickly. And yet, she said, her voice measured, some would argue that Black entrepreneurs today have more opportunities than ever before. Elliot said nothing, waiting for the rest. That programs like affirmative action, minority business grants, and federal incentives exist specifically to open doors that weren't open decades ago. She folded her hands neatly. Do you not think those programs have helped? Elliot leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees, eyes locked onto hers. You know what's funny? He said, his voice steady. When a Black business owner succeeds, people always ask which program helped us. A pause. But nobody asks which old money bank helped fund a white-owned startup. Nobody asks which family connections got them into Stanford. Nobody asks which golf buddy invested in their company before it ever made $1. He let that sink in. The room was quiet. The audience, the crew, they were all listening now. Catherine Monroe, ever the professional, kept her expression neutral. But she hadn't expected him to flip the question back on her. She took a slow breath, her pen tapping against the cue cards once more. Well, she said finally, that's certainly an interesting perspective. Elliot smiled. No, Catherine. He leaned back. That's reality. For the first time since the interview began, Catherine Monroe hesitated. It wasn't obvious, just a brief pause, a flicker of thought behind her eyes, but Elliot Hayes caught it. She was recalibrating. He had deflected her leading questions, turned her own arguments back on her, and kept his composure under the heat of the cameras. She wasn't used to losing control. Catherine took a slow breath, her fingers tightening slightly around her cue cards. Then she set them down, leaning in just enough to make it look casual. Here it comes. The final move. Elliot, she said, her voice measured, smooth as ever, I think it's fair to say you're passionate about this. And I respect that. Elliot gave a slight nod, waiting. But let me ask you something. She let the pause hang, her gaze locked onto his. Do you think some of this outrage is exaggerated? The words landed like a loaded gun on the coffee table between them. Catherine tilted her head slightly. After all, your success story proves that the system isn't as stacked against Black entrepreneurs as some claim. There it was. The audacity of the question almost made Elliot laugh. Almost. Instead, he exhaled slowly, shaking his head as a quiet chuckle escaped his lips. Not amused, just tired. You know, he said, voice measured. It's funny how people love to use one success story as proof that a problem doesn't exist. Catherine's smile stayed put, but something in her eyes flickered. Elliot leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on his knees, his voice steady but heavier now. Let me put it this way, Catherine. If one person climbs out of a burning building, do you point at them and say, see? The fire wasn't that bad. The studio went still. Catherine opened her mouth, hesitated, then closed it. Even the crew had stopped moving. The weight of his words had settled over the room like a thick, inescapable fog. Elliot wasn't finished. The fact that I made it doesn't mean the system isn't broken. His voice was calm, but the gravity behind it was undeniable. It just means I had to fight twice as hard to get through it. The silence that followed was pure, heavy, uncomfortable in a way that couldn't be ignored. Catherine shifted in her seat, reaching for a controlled response, something neutral to smooth it all over. I understand your perspective, she said carefully. Then she turned slightly toward the camera, her tone adopting the carefully neutral cadence of a journalist in damage control. But some might say your frustration isn't really about race, she continued. That it's about resentment toward larger corporations. She lifted her cue card. After all, you've publicly criticized big tech companies for not hiring more diverse executives. Elliot tilted his head slightly, not thrown off. Just considering. Resentment? He repeated. Then he shook his head. No. His voice was firm now, razor sharp. Accountability? Absolutely. Catherine pressed her lips together for a beat. Then what do you say, she asked, to those who believe that in today's economy, success is based on hard work, not race? Elliot exhaled through his nose. Then, without breaking eye contact, he delivered the moment that would send shockwaves across the country. I say that people love to believe in fairy tales. A ripple of silence washed over the set. But let's be real. His voice never wavered. Black entrepreneurs still get denied loans at twice the rate of white business owners. We still receive less than 2% of venture capital funding. And even when we prove ourselves, we still get asked whether we deserved our success. Catherine sat completely still, listening, but not necessarily hearing. So let's stop pretending the system isn't rigged, Elliot said, his voice low but firm. It is. And the only people who don't see it are the ones it works for. Silence. Not just discomfort, now impact. The producers didn't cut to commercial. The control room didn't intervene. This was raw, unscripted. A reckoning happening in real time. Catherine adjusted in her seat, clearing her throat, glancing briefly at the off-camera producers. But there was no rescue coming. She had walked into this. And now, she had to sit in it. The moment the cameras cut to commercial, the real storm began. Elliot Hayes stood from his chair, buttoning his suit jacket with steady hands as Catherine Monroe offered a polite, tight-lipped smile. Appreciate you being here, Elliot, she said, her voice still smooth, but her eyes betrayed something else, a flicker of unease. Elliot simply nodded. Likewise, but he knew better. This wasn't over. As soon as he stepped off the set, his phone started buzzing. Texts, missed calls, notifications flooding in like a dam had just burst. Something was happening. By the time he reached the car, Twitter was on fire. Trending, #ElliotHayes, #TruthHurts, #MorningPerspective. Clips of the interview were everywhere. Elliot Hayes just exposed the media's bias on live TV. This was powerful. The way he looked straight into the camera and called out America? Chills. He was absolutely right. People only question success when it's someone who looks like him. But it wasn't just praise. The backlash was swift. Here we go again. Another successful guy playing the victim. Cry me a river. Hard work speaks louder than excuses. Quit blaming the system and take some accountability. This is why people don't like hiring activists. He just proved the point. By noon, cable news had picked up the firestorm. Fox News, is Elliot Hayes the new face of corporate entitlement? CNN, Elliot Hayes' viral moment. A reckoning for America's meritocracy. Business Insider. What Elliot Hayes' interview reveals about race and success in America. Naomi Carter called as soon as he reached his office. Do you realize, she said, half laughing, half exasperated, that you just set the internet on fire? Elliot dropped into his leather chair, rubbing his temple. Wasn't exactly the plan. Well, congrats, she quipped. Because you're officially the most talked about entrepreneur in America. He didn't respond right away. He knew what came next. Because viral moments don't stay just moments. They become battlegrounds. By the next morning, the fallout had escalated. Some investors pulled out. One of Nextech's biggest corporate partners suddenly decided to reevaluate their commitments. But on the other hand, new opportunities flooded in. Naomi scrolled through the influx of emails. You know, we just got a flood of investor inquiries. People want to work with us. Elliot smirked. Let me guess. The same people who ignored us last year? She shrugged. Guess being controversial is good for business. But it wasn't just business concerns anymore. By mid-afternoon, the threats started rolling in. Emails. Phone calls. Even an unmarked package left outside Nextech headquarters. Nothing inside except a single sheet of paper. One word written in bold. Enough. Naomi frowned as she read it. You need security. Elliot exhaled slowly. He knew this would come. Because every time a black man speaks too boldly, too unapologetically, this is the cost. The only question now, was he willing to pay it? Elliot Hayes stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of his office, gazing out at the New York City skyline. From up here, the world looked calm, orderly. But his phone, buzzing constantly on his desk, told a different story. Naomi Carter sat across from him, scrolling through an endless stream of emails, calls, and media requests. Her expression was unreadable. "You should see some of these offers," she said. "Speaking engagements, investor meetings, panel invitations. People want you in rooms they never wanted you in before." Elliot smirked. "Let me guess, the same ones who ignored my calls 2 years ago?" "Exactly." She tossed her phone onto the table. "Funny how fast people change when they think they can make money off you." But not all attention was good attention. Because mixed in with the offers and praise, the threats kept coming. Another voicemail. Another anonymous email. Another warning disguised as a concerned citizen message. "You've said enough. Be careful where you step. You don't want to make this worse for yourself." And then there was the package. Naomi eyed the crumpled sheet of paper sitting on his desk, the one with a single word written in bold: enough. She had barely put it down since opening it. "You need security, Elliot," she said finally. "I'm serious." He exhaled, rubbing his temple. He wasn't naive. He knew how this worked. The second a black man speaks too boldly, too unapologetically, the backlash isn't just words. It becomes something else. Elliot turned back toward the window, letting the weight of it all settle over him. The past 72 hours had been a whirlwind. Praise, backlash, threats, opportunities. And now, he had a choice. He could walk away. Let the controversy fade. Get back to business, let the noise die down, and move on like nothing had happened. Or, he could lean into it. Not for clout, not for attention, but because this wasn't just about him anymore. Because if they were going to put him under a spotlight, he was damn sure going to control the narrative. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. His assistant poked her head in. "There's someone here to see you." Naomi and Elliot exchanged a glance. "Who?" he asked. She hesitated. "A producer from a major network." Elliot raised an eyebrow. "They want to talk about a televised special," she continued. "A one-on-one deep dive about race, business, and the system." Elliot exhaled. So now, they wanted to listen. Naomi studied him carefully. "What do you want to do?" Elliot didn't answer right away. Instead, he picked up the sheet of paper on his desk, the threat, the warning. Then, with quiet precision, he tore it in half. He turned to Naomi, voice steady. "Tell them. I'll do it." Her eyes widened slightly. "You sure?" Elliot nodded. "Yeah. But on my terms." The offer sat in front of him, a full-length televised special. A chance to sit down, unfiltered, and lay everything out on his terms. Elliot Hayes had spent years building, fighting, proving. He had clawed his way up from nothing, navigating a world that never expected him to succeed, and when he did, they tried to explain it away. Now, they wanted him to talk. Not just in a 5-minute segment where they could control the edits, but in a full-length sit-down. Prime time. A risk? Absolutely. A trap? Possibly. But an opportunity? Without a doubt. Naomi Carter sat across from him, arms crossed, eyes sharp. "You don't have to do this," she said. "You could walk away. Let the internet move on to the next controversy. Get back to running Nextech." Elliot leaned back in his chair, considering. She wasn't wrong. The storm would pass. It always did. The outrage cycle would reset, and something else, some other viral moment, would take its place. But that wasn't the point, because this wasn't just about defending himself. It was about the conversation they were too afraid to have. Elliot laced his fingers together, his voice steady. "If I don't do it, they'll fill in the blanks themselves. They'll control the story. And I'm done letting other people define what my success means." Naomi exhaled, shaking her head. "You know they'll come for you harder, I know. They'll try to spin it. Paint you as an activist, a troublemaker, someone who just wants attention." He smirked. "They already are." Naomi let out a soft laugh, but it faded quickly. "Then let me ask you this, what do you actually want out of this? What's the goal?" Elliot thought for a moment, then met her gaze. "I want people to stop pretending the playing field is level, when it never has been." He leaned forward. "I want every young black entrepreneur watching to know that when they question your success, when they try to make you prove you belong in a room you built yourself, it's not because you don't deserve it. It's because they weren't ready for you to succeed in the first place." Naomi studied him for a long moment. Then, finally, she nodded. "All right. Let's do it. But we do it smart. We set the conditions. We make sure they can't twist your words. Elliot smirked. We? She rolled her eyes. Oh, please. You think I'm gonna let you do this alone? He chuckled, shaking his head. I'd be lost without you, Naomi. She smirked. Damn right you would. Elliot glanced at the folder on his desk. One last time, then picked up his pen. With one smooth motion, he signed the deal. This time, he wasn't just a guest on their platform. He was the one telling the story. And this time, they couldn't ignore him. In life, there will always be people who try to define your success for you, who question how you got where you are, who assume you had an advantage rather than recognizing your hard work. Elliot Hayes' story is a reminder that success is not just about proving yourself. It's about owning your narrative. Too often, people are told to be grateful for their seat at the table rather than questioning why they had to fight so hard to get there. The real lesson. You don't have to justify your success to those who refuse to see the obstacles you overcame. For older generations, this rings especially true. Many have faced their own battles, breaking barriers, challenging expectations, and working twice as hard just to be seen. The world may try to move on, rewrite history, or diminish the struggles that paved the way, but your story is yours to tell. Elliot didn't let others define him. Neither should you. Whether in business, family, or personal growth, never let someone else control the narrative of your life. You earned your place. Stand in it with confidence. Elliot Hayes' journey is more than just a viral moment, it's a reckoning. It's about refusing to let others define your worth, about standing firm in the face of doubt, and about taking control of your own story. Because at the end of the day, success isn't just about winning, it's about who gets to tell the story. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and subscribe for more powerful narratives about resilience, truth, and the fight for what's right.